Hi everyone, so my topic is energy supply for muscle and muscle twitch tetanus. Energy supply for muscle. So, in adenosine triphosphate or ATP, it is known as the energy source for all of the contractions, and this ATP is released when adenosine bisphosphate ADP and phosphate group is broken. So, maintaining the availability of ATP for molecule contraction is the limiting factor. So ATP is not stored in large amounts in skeletal muscles. Then the viable sources of ATP, it can be both. It can be from anaerobic and aerobic. Anaerobic does not require oxygen, and whereas aerobic requires oxygen. And the primary energy source for an activity that will mainly depend on the intensity of the muscle contractions. So the two viable sources that ATP comes from can be anaerobic and aerobic, and the two anaerobic sources of ATP is further divided can be phosphocreatine and anaerobic glycolysis. Then anaerobic glycolysis means it is the breakdown of the glucose to pyruvate, that too in the absence of oxygen, which because since it's anaerobic, and this is converted into lactic acid. So anaerobic glycolysis refers to the breakdown of glucose to pyruvate, which in the absence of oxygen is converted to lactic acid, and the process is known as glycolysis. In muscle fibers, this glucose is made available through the breakdown of muscle glycogen stores. Anaerobic glycolysis is not limited by the availability of glycogen. Instead, the accumulation of lactic acid and other metabolites is the limiting factor of anaerobic glycolysis. Then aerobic glycolysis, it occurs when the oxygen is available for the breakdown of pyruvate, and that yields ATP, and that occurs through chemical reactions like in the Krebs cycle and the electron transport system. Then the most energy source available to the muscle fiber is fat, and this breakdown of fat yields ATP, which is referred to as lipolysis. So lipolysis is responsible for arresting muscle activity, but the contribution of this lipolysis to the overall muscle energy supply will decrease as the contraction intensity increases. So as the intensity of his contraction increases, the contribution to the overall muscle energy supply will decrease. Which means it is directly proportional. Once the glycogen depletion occurs, the exercise intensity will be reduced dramatically. Creatine phosphate or creatine B, which serves as an energy buffer in muscles. So creatine phosphate, it helps to maintain a constant concentration of the ATP in the muscles during sudden burst or exercise that would otherwise deplete ATP concentration in the cells. So when sometimes sudden contraction or any contraction or anything or burst occurs during the exercise, or sometimes this creatine P helps maintains the concentration of the ATP in the muscle, and that would otherwise this would have the depletion of ATP would happen in the concentration of the cell. The creatine synthesized in the liver is transported through the bloodstream to skeletal and heart muscles. So the mode of transportation for this creatine is the bloodstream, and it enters the mitochondria, where it is phosphorylated to creatine P. Now the enzyme that catalyzes the conversion of creatine is known as creatine kinase, and it uses adenosine triphosphate or ATP to create phosphocreatine and adenosine bisphosphate. And this enzyme creatine kinase is responsible for enzyme reaction is reversible, and thus ATP can be generated from phosphocreatine and adenosine biphosphate. Next, this is my figure of metabolic sources of energy for muscle contraction. The first one is the ATP from creatine phosphate. Then the second one is ATP from anaerobic glycolysis, and the last one is ATP from aerobic cellular respiration. Then here we can see that ATP is converted to ADP, and then creatine is converted to creatine phosphate, and then ATP again to ADP, then the energy for muscle contraction. And glycolysis from ATP from anaerobic glycolysis, it shows how the glycogen is through glycolysis it is converted into lactic acid, and then finally from aerobic cellular respiration, it shows how the cellular respiration in mitochondria occurs and releases ATP. The next is about muscle twitch tetanus. The muscle twitching, which is also called muscle fasciculation, fasciculation, it involves small contractions in the body. So people sometimes who experience these muscle twitches have muscles that unexpectedly tighten or contract or relax. So this unexperiences or unexpectedly the tightening or contraction or relaxation of the muscles leads to muscle twitching, or sometimes what we call as a muscle fasciculation. So the common causes of this muscle twitching can be in physical activities like sudden exercises and all, then stress, anxiety, stimulants, nutrient deficiencies, dehydration, nicotine, electrolyte imbalances. So while most muscle twitching is the result of minor conditions and certain lifestyle habits, also lifestyle habits also depend on the muscle twitching, along with other things, some minor conditions. So some of the serious issues that can trigger the muscle twitches include muscular dystrophies. Next is about muscle twitch tetanus. The muscle twitching, which is also called muscle fasciculation, fasciculation, it involves small contractions in the body. So people sometimes who experience these muscle twitches have muscles that unexpectedly tighten or contract or relax. So this unexperiences or unexpectedly the tightening or contraction or relaxation of the muscles leads to muscle twitching, or sometimes what we call as muscle fasciculation. So the common causes of this muscle twitching can be in physical activities like sudden exercises and all, then stress, anxiety, stimulants, nutrient deficiencies, dehydration, nicotine, electrolyte imbalances. So while most muscle twitching is the result of minor conditions and certain lifestyle habits, also lifestyle habits also depend on the muscle twitching, along with other things, some minor conditions. So some of the serious issues that can trigger the muscle twitches include muscular dystrophies, spinal muscular atrophy, chronic kidney disease. When it comes to the treatment of muscle twitch tetanus, it is usually necessary for muscle twitching, but you may need treatment if one of the more serious conditions is causing for your muscle condition. If more than one conditions are causing treatment might be necessary. A tetanic contraction is a sustained muscle contraction evoked when the motor nerve that innervates a skeletal muscle emits action potentials at a very high rate. So mainly tetanic contraction means that a contraction occurs as a muscle contraction that is provoked or that comes when the motor nerve comes that innervates when motor nerve innervates a skeletal muscle, and that emits a action potential at that too in a very high rate. And a tetanic contraction can be either fused, which means unfused, which means incomplete, or fused, complete. So unfused tetanus is when the muscle fibers do not completely relax before the next stimulus because they are being stimulated at a very fast rate. However, there is a partial relaxation of the muscle fibers between the twitches. So unfused tetanus means there is a partial relaxation, which means it's not completely relaxed, but there is it is partial relaxation of the muscle fibers. And fused tetanus is when there is no relaxation of the muscle fibers between stimuli, and it occurs during high rate of stimulation. And fused is partial relaxation, whereas fused means there is no relaxation of the muscle fibers between the stimuli, and that occurs at a high rate of stimulation. And this is a figure showing the control of muscle tension, which shows a single twitch, wave summation, then unfused tetanus and fused tetanus. From the figure graph itself, we can see that fused tetanus happens at a very high rate of stimulation, whereas unfused is not at much of high rate.